So then let's start adrenal gland. Adrenal gland. So adrenal gland, our body has one pair of adrenal gland. You see here, this is above the kidney. That's why we also call this gland as suprarenal gland. Supra, above, renal, kidney, above the kidney. We say that's why suprarenal gland. Okay. Next, our body has one pair of adrenal glands like this. One at the anterior part of the each kidney. The gland is composed of two types of tissue. The gland is composed of two types of tissues. What are they? That centrally located adrenal cortex. Centrally located adrenal cortex. So I'll show here. This is the adrenal medulla I'm talking. The centrally located adrenal medulla, and outside that lies adrenal cortex. This one. These are adrenal cortex. Okay, adrenal cortex out and inner adrenal medulla. So simply we say adrenal gland is composed of cortex and medulla. Okay. Adrenal medulla. Let's talk about the adrenal medulla first. Then after we'll go with the adrenal cortex. Adrenal medulla consists of irregularly shaped cells arranged in the groups around blood vessels. Around blood vessels, that irregularly shaped cells arranged in groups. These cells are intimately connected with the sympathetic nervous system. That it is believed to be actually the adrenal medulla, which is the center of adrenal gland, is a modified sympathetic nervous system. Some of the scientists believe it like so, because the actions of the adrenal, the outside is the cortex, and now I'm showing the inside with red color, that is adrenal medulla. So this medulla, it is believed to be the modified sympathetic nervous system, because the actions of the medulla is completely similar with the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. In fact, that adrenal medullary cells are modified post-ganglionic neurons, and pre-ganglionic autonomic nerve fiber lead to them directly from the central nervous system. Shall I remind you once again? There is a ganglia. Their post-ganglionic nerve fiber goes to the body parts. We learned like this in sympathetic nervous system. And who is controlling them? From the CNS, either from the brain or spinal cord, the preganglionic nerve fibers are coming and signaling them. Okay, so this is preganglionic nerve fiber. We discussed this in autonomic nervous system. Let me show you once again. Adrenal medullary cells are modified. These are the adrenal medullary cells I'm talking about. Adrenal medullary cells are the modified post-ganglionic neurons, he's saying. So this is the post-ganglionic neuron. Adrenal medullary cells are the modified post-ganglionic neuron, and preganglionic autonomic nerve fiber lead to them. Talking about this, lead to them directly from the central nervous system, they are saying. Okay, that means whatever the issue we learn in case of sympathetic nervous system, the same issue we are talking here also. That's why we are saying comparison with sympathetic nervous system. Okay, that we are comparing with sympathetic nervous system. Now, let's continue. That adrenal cortex, when it comes to adrenal cortex, makes up the bulk of the adrenal gland. It is composed of closely packed masses of epithelial layers that form an outer, a middle, and inner zones of the cortex like zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. There are three layers actually. This is also a sequence question you need to remember. Zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. Order from outside to inside. You need to remember. Okay, so who is outer one? Zona glomerulosa. Middle, zona fasciculata. Innermost is said to be zona reticularis. And who is the innermost one? That means that is medulla. Okay, the full picture now it came over. Okay, so that the full picture of this adrenal gland. Adrenal gland outside is cortex, I said. Then, and from here, from outside to the inside, zona glomerulosa, the first one, zona glomerulosa, then zona fasciculata, then zona reticularis. These three are belongs to the cortex, and the innermost is going to be medulla. This is the complete anatomy of adrenal gland to be remembered over. Okay. Next, let's continue. So this is the area that you can see in the diagram. In the transverse section, you can see like this, that outer is the capsular sheath is present as well, the fibrous connective tissue that is. And then after the cortex one and the medulla. Center, it contains medulla. And the cells, epithelial cells of the outside of the cortex, first zona glomerulosa. Next, who is there? Zona fasciculata. Next, zona reticularis. Likewise, zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, zona glomerular. Okay, so that the three are present here. Here only I'll remind you once that we'll see, but let me remind you once. Zona glomerulosa. Zona glomerulosa is going to secrete mineralocorticoids, which is nothing but aldosterone. Okay. Zona fasciculata, in the order, I am following the order. Zona fasciculata secrete glucocorticoids. Next, zona reticularis is going to secrete sex corticoids. Zona reticularis is going to secrete sex corticoids. Okay, so why I'm making you to remember here? We'll come, we're going to learn this. But why? Because the questions will come like this. Outermost layer of the cortex secrete mineralocorticoids like aldosterone. Then middle layer of the cortex secrete glucocorticoids that like cortisol. That innermost layer of the cortex innermost layer, sex corticoids. That kind of questions we get. That's why I'm saying here also. Okay, so now let's come with the functions of medulla. As we have seen, anatomy of cortex, anatomy of medulla. Now the functions, the physiology of adrenal medulla. The cells of the adrenal medulla are called as chromaffin cells, to be remembered here. That in some certain previous examinations we got this name, that at least not at present, that means at present you don't have this in NCERT text, but this is very important to be remembered. The cells of the adrenal medulla, chromaffin cells, produce, store and secrete two closely related hormones. What are they? Epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine or adrenaline, we can say. Norepinephrine or noradrenaline. The both of these substances are a type of amine called catecholamine. Putting in the boxes, whatever important. So catecholamines, and they have the similar molecular structures and physiological function. Then why we say epinephrine and norepinephrine? That in fact, epinephrine is synthesized from norepinephrine. Epinephrine is even synthesized from norepinephrine. Let us see the story of epinephrine and norepinephrine. From this page, you need to remember which cells are going to do so. Chromaffin cells. What are the hormone? Epinephrine and norepinephrine. They are prepared from an amine called catecholamine. The amine called catecholamines. Okay. The hormones of the adrenal medulla. The synthesis of these hormones begins with the amino acid tyrosine. Synthesis of these hormones, adrenal medullary hormones, begins with an amino acid tyrosine. About 15% of norepinephrine is not converted but is stored unchanged. The hormones are stored in tiny vesicles. We call them as chromaffin granules, much like neurotransmitters, which are stored in the neuron. We have seen in case of oxytocin and vasopressin, they're going to be stored over. As I already made you to say that earlier, that we don't have any storage capacity for the hormones in general. But neurosecretory cells are having storage. That showing the property of neurotransmitter. They stored in the neurons. Okay. So effects of the adrenal medullary hormone. Effects generally resemble those that results when sympathetic nerve fibers stimulate their effector. whatever the sympathetic nervous system impact is there on the body that we discussed earlier, like heartbeat increase, breath rate increase, that blood vessel dilation, gastrointestinal tract inhibition, that the inhibition of the release of enzymes, the saliva is going to be stopped, whatever the activities we discussed in the earlier classes about the sympathetic. Now, the sympathetic nerve fibers are going to do the whatever they do, this the function of the adrenal medullary hormone also going to be same. We can see these effects include, as we said now, increase the heart rate, increase the force of the cardiac muscle contraction, and elevation of the blood pressure, increased breath rate, and decreased activity of the digestive system. Digestive enzymes are getting stopped at the time. That after that, what do you say? That salivary juice is stopped. That all that activities, whatever we do in sympathetic nervous system, are going to be the same with the adrenal medullary hormone. The hormonal effects last up to 10 times longer than the neurotransmitter effects. Why? Because the hormones are removed from the tissue relatively slowly. The hormonal effects last up to 10 times longer than the neurotransmitter effects we can see. That means it is more powerful than sympathetic nervous system we are going to say. Why? Why? Because the action pattern, how do they affect? Hormones removed from the tissues relatively slowly. You remember in case of synaptic cleft, I said over, whenever the acetylcholine is released in the synaptic cleft, immediately relieved in the fraction of millisecond, that will be removed by an enzyme called cholinesterase, isn't it? That when you talk about the sympathin, we are just talking comparison with sympathin itself, isn't it? So that the neurotransmitter sympathin is released from sympathetic nervous system into the synapse. Immediately that will be released, that will be deleted, that will be dissolved, removed by monoamine oxidase. There is an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, immediately dissolves. But what we are saying here, that because the hormones are removed from the tissues relatively slowly, removal of them is relatively slowly. That's why their hormonal effect is going to be last up to 10 times longer than the neurotransmitter effect. That means talking about that 10 times more effect than the sympathetic nervous system, which these adrenal medullary hormones can do. That's what we are talking about. Okay, next discussing about this adrenal medulla, the ratio of the two hormones in the adrenal medullary secretions. Now we need to discuss. We said there are two, epinephrine and norepinephrine, isn't it? So that epinephrine or norepinephrine, you may call it as earlier class, adrenaline and noradrenaline, no matter, epinephrine or adrenaline, norepinephrine or noradrenaline. So nearly 80% is the epinephrine and 20% is going to be norepinephrine. Although these hormones effects are generally similar, certain effectors respond differently to them. That means, do you remember we said on the cells we have some hormone receptor. So their receptors have some relative difference. These differences are due to the relative numbers of alpha and beta receptors in the membranes of the effector cells. That means there is a little difference we have with epinephrine and norepinephrine response by the cells we are talking about. That certain effector respond differently into them, that they are saying. Then impulses arriving by way of sympathetic nerve fiber stimulate the adrenal medulla to release its hormones at the same time. Do you remember this? When we said ACTH, which is from the pituitary gland, who is influenced by the hypothalamus, is not at all having any effect on adrenal medulla, because see the full form. ACTH from the pituitary gland, adrenocorticotropic hormone, that means that stimulate the adrenal cortex for the release of gluco and mineralo and sex corticoid, isn't it? There is no role of pituitary gland on these adrenal medulla. So where it gets suggestions from them, the impulses arriving by way of sympathetic nerve fiber stimulate the adrenal medulla to release its hormones at the same time. Other effectors are also stimulated by sympathetic impulses. As a rule, these impulses originate from the hypothalamus in response to the stress. So likewise, not through these growth releasing and inhibiting hormone. So that when stress is raised, that means when in front of you, as we said about one example earlier, that is that when tiger is there in front of you, similar kind of example I explained for sympathetic nervous system. So that stress makes what? Hypothalamus. That medullary secretions are going to be stimulated by the neurons together with the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, preparing the body for energy expending action, fight or flight. Fight or flight. I'm adding one more. Fight or flight or fright. Fear we are talking about. That's why adrenal medullary gland is generally called as 3F gland. 3F gland means fight, flight, fright. So one thing you need to remember here, the similar kind of action is done by sympathetic nervous system. And the very important thing for adrenal medulla to be remembered, that it is believed to be modified sympathetic nerve ganglia, adrenal medulla also. Okay, so that's it. The story of adrenal medulla, which is called as fight, flight, fright hormone, a 3F gland. Okay. So here only I'll explain adrenal cortex also. I'm going with adrenal cortex. But before we enter inside, let's make some comparison here. Adrenal cortex, glucocorticoids, cortisol is there in carbohydrate metabolism, that we say sugar. Aldosterone is there in salt metabolism. Cortisol is also participate in the stress mechanism. Yes, a stress mechanism. Sugar, salt, stress. And we know the sex corticoids are present in the glucocorticoids. We have special sex corticoids which release androgens and estrogens. So by looking the four events, what you can say adrenal cortex then? 4S gland. Adrenal cortex is called 4S gland. Adrenal medulla is called 3F gland. Okay, so that's it. That we remembered over. That 4S gland and 3F gland, cortex and medulla. Okay, so let's continue with adrenal cortex here. Let me continue with adrenal cortex. The hormones of the adrenal cortex. The cells of the adrenal cortex produce more than 30 different steroids. So we are saying just giving sample like cortisol, aldosterone, likewise that so many steroids are going to be released here, including several hormones like corticosteroids. Unlike the adrenal medullary hormone, without which a person can survive. Actually, why? Because if you remove the adrenal medulla, a person can survive. Because we have an alternate sympathetic nervous system is there, isn't it? So unlike the adrenal medullary hormone, without which a person can survive, but some of those released by the cortex are vital that may kill the human if you remove the adrenal cortex. In fact, the abdominal adrenal cortex secretions, a person usually dies within a week without extensive electrolyte therapy. That means because aldosterone of adrenal cortex is maintaining the salt balance, corticosteroids are maintaining sugar balance. As I said to you, 4S gland. The most important adrenal cortical hormones are aldosterone, cortisol, and certain sex hormones like androgens and estrogens. Okay. As I shown to you this diagram earlier, and this formality order is also going to be a question from outside to the inside. Zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona radicularis. And do remember this diagram. Zona glomerulosa is secreting mineralocorticoid. Major mineralocorticoid is aldosterone. Zona fasciculata is releasing glucocorticoids. The major glucocorticoid is cortisol. We have only cortisol in our syllabus. Cortisol, cortisol, corticosterol. Okay, zona radicularis, androgens, we can see that androgens and estrogens. Okay, so then after medulla is going to be secrete the hormones here till the time we discuss that catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine, which together called catecholamines. Okay, and I said to you, remember the chromaffin cells also. This page is very important that you can take the screenshot which explains the whole adrenal cortex at a glance as a single diagram is explaining the whole Now it's better to take the screenshot. Okay, now let's move. The hormones of the adrenal cortex, talking about aldosterone first of all, the cells in the outer zone. That cells in the outer zone, what it means? Zona glomerulosa. Zona glomerulosa of the adrenal cortex synthesize a hormone called aldosterone. This hormone is called mineralocorticoid because it helps and regulate the concentration of the mineral electrolyte such as sodium and potassium ion. If you remember, we are seeing this in nephron, in the DCT. We said under the influence of this aldosterone, we are absorbing that the sodium and secretion of the potassium we did earlier. Okay, so that means it is maintaining salt balance, you can see. So more specifically, aldosterone causes the kidney to conserve sodium ions and to excrete potassium ions. The cells that secrete aldosterone respond directly to changes in the composition of blood plasma. That means when blood plasma ionic balance is imbalanced, that aldosterone secretions is going to be stimulated. So, however, while an increase in plasma potassium strongly stimulates the cells, a decrease in the plasma sodium only slightly stimulates them. Negative effect we say here. Increase in plasma potassium. If plasma potassium increases immediately, that this strongly stimulates the cells. A decrease in the plasma sodium, we have less slight stimulation. We say. The control of aldosterone secretion is linked indirectly to the plasma sodium level by action of groups of specialized kidney cells. What do you say them as? Juxtaglomerular cell. Talking about RAS, renin angiotensin aldosterone system. We discussed detail in excretory system. Renin angiotensin aldosterone system is stimulating two hormones, if you remember, ADH and aldosterone. So that respond to the changes in the blood pressure and plasma sodium ion concentration. That will be remembered. Next, that about the aldosterone, more information. If either of these factors decreases, the call that cells release an enzyme called renin. Then renin. That, do you remember the story of RAS? Renin angiotensin aldosterone. Angiotensinogen, which is released from the liver, will be converted into angiotensin 1 by renin, angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme of the lungs. I'm going a little faster because we have learned about the RAS system. Okay, so what angiotensin 2 do? That stimulate the ADH, that stimulate the aldosterone for secretion. That story I'm making you to remember. It took enough time to explain that area. So another enzyme, angiotensin converting enzyme in the lungs, convert the angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, what we said now, which is carried into the bloodstream. Now talking about the angiotensin 2, reaches the adrenal cortex and stimulate the release of aldosterone. Okay, so then that aldosterone is released along with ADH. ACTH also stimulates the secretion of aldosterone and is necessary for aldosterone secretion to respond other stimuli. Means we are talking about the possibilities of release of aldosterone. One, we say RAS mechanism promote the release of aldosterone. RAS mechanism is promoting the release of aldosterone. Another, our ACTH RH is there from the hypothalamus. Stimulate the anterior pituitary for ACTH. That ACTH will come the adrenal gland and make the stimulation of the aldosterone secretion. So there are two possibilities we can say. Okay, so aldosterone functioning. What is the function? Aldosterone is conserving sodium ions. Very important. Retains water indirectly by osmosis. This helps maintain blood sodium ion. This helps maintain blood sodium ion concentration and blood volume. Then angiotensin 2 helps in maintain the systemic blood pressure by constricting blood vessels. Vasoconstriction, we said earlier. Okay, then hypersecretion leads to what? The amount of sodium increases in the blood. More aldosterone means more sodium in the blood. That more sodium increases the blood pressure. isn't it? Hypotension will be developed over. As the amount of sodium increases in blood, the potassium passes out through the urine, that causing the kidney failure in later stages. We say Conn's disease. Not much famous. That to be remembered as Conn's disease. Hypersecretion of the aldosterone is Conn's disease. So now that taking another hormone, cortisol, cortisol, corticosterone, various hormones are there. We are taking that major one, cortisol, we are taking now. In addition to the affecting glucose, the cortisol, we have to go. That cortisol, as I said to you, it is there in sugar metabolism, glucocorticoid, isn't it? So I remind you once, then after I'll go. Zona glomerulosa is outer layer. Zona fasciculata, zona reticulars. We are completed. Zona glomerulosa released mineralocorticoids containing aldosterone hormone. Now I entered into the zona fasciculata, is releasing glucocorticoids, which have the major one is the cortisol. Now we are discussing about the cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone which maintains sugar metabolism. So cortisol influences the protein. In addition to the glucose, it also participates in the protein and fat metabolism also. Among the more important actions of the cortisol, let us see here we have that three major functions. It inhibits the synthesis of protein in various tissues, increasing blood concentration of amino acid. It inhibits the synthesis of protein in various tissues, increasing blood concentration of amino acids. Yes, it promotes the release of fatty acids from adipose tissue, increasing the use of fatty acid. Metabolic activity improvement using the fats also as an energy source and decreasing the use of glucose as an energy source. That means more cortisol, person become more lean, isn't it? So it promotes the release of fatty acid from the adipose tissue, increasing the use of fatty acid as an energy source instead of glucose. So it stimulates the liver cells to synthesize glucose from non-carbohydrate. We call it as gluconeogenesis, such as circulating amino acids and glycerol, thus increasing the blood glucose concentration, such as circulating amino acid and glycerol, thus increasing the blood glucose concentration. These three are the functions. Shall we see once? It inhibits the synthesis of protein in various tissues, increasing blood concentration of amino acids. That's the first one. And it promotes the release of fatty acid from adipose tissue, increasing the use of fatty acid as an energy source and decreasing the use of glucose as an energy source. Then the next third point, it stimulates the liver cells to synthesize the glucose from non-carbohydrate. We call it as gluconeogenesis, and such as circulating amino acids and glycerol, thus increasing the blood glucose concentration. These are the major functions of the cortisol. Okay. Cortisol actions help keep the blood glucose concentration within the normal range between the meals. These actions are important because just a few hours without food can exhaust the liver glycogen and another major source of the glucose. That we know that the liver is converting the glycogen into glucose and glucose into glycogen. More relation we'll discuss in insulin hormone. So that we need to understand. Carbohydrate metabolism is done by cortisol along with the actions going on with insulin and liver. That cortisol is also is doing this carbohydrate metabolism. But what cortisol famous for? Utilizing non-carbohydrate substances as a source of energy. That is very important function, an interesting function even. Okay, now a negative feedback mechanism, much like the controlling the thyroid hormones like T3 and T4, regulates cortisol release also. That means it involves the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary gland, and adrenal cortex. How? How? Because the hypothalamus, we discussed in the starting itself, that is having the habituation of releasing hormone and inhibiting hormone, that kind of habit it is having. So I said everywhere. In case of thyroid, now in case of adrenal cortex, ACTH, RH we have to see. ACTH, RH released from the hypothalamus will go to the anterior pituitary, make the stimulation of the ACTH that will come and that stimulate the adrenal gland, particularly cortex for the secretion of cortisol. That story we are saying. Okay, the hypothalamus secrete corticotropin releasing hormone into the set point. That's what you have to ACTH, RH. Whatever I said is given as corticotropin releasing hormone. It is a set point of the feedback loop controlling the cortisol secretion changes from time to time, enabling hormone output to alter to meet the demands of the changing conditions of the body. That means everything is under the control of hypothalamus, isn't it? We can see. For example, let's take an example here. Under stress or injury, disease, extreme temperature, or emotional upset, the nerve impulses send the brain information concerning the stressful condition. So what happens in response to that? The brain center signals to the hypothalamus to release more corticotropin hormone. I named it as ACTHRH for our simplest, to understand simply, that ACTHRH or corticotropin hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone. Okay, then leading to a higher concentration of the cortisol until the stress subsides. Let's follow the given one. CRH. What is CRH? Corticotropin releasing hormone. What is C? Corticotropin, which is nothing but ACTH, that stimulates adrenal cortex for cortisol. CCC. Corticotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin, nothing but ACTH, and that is make the secretion of cortisol. Okay, so how it secretes, that mechanism is given here. When we are under stress or injury or disease or extreme temperature condition or emotional upset, that nerve impulses that send the information to the brain and release of cortisol. Simply we say at the time cortisol will be released over to subsidize the activity. The cortisol levels will be increased over. What happens if the cortisol levels increases, reaches maximum? That we are talking about hypersecretion. Hypersecretion, Cushing syndrome, to be remembered. Cushing syndrome. That blood glucose level rises, that we call such condition as hyperglycemia. Blood glucose levels will be raised over and glucose start passing through the urine. That can be called glycosuria, urine in the glucose in the urine. So, okay, due to fat deposition in the back, it shows a buffalo hump condition, that moon-like face, buffalo hump, that means here accumulation of the fat in one particular place seems to be like buffalo hump. That all you can see in the case of Cushing syndrome. Pendulum-like, that means pendulum-like abdomen, that means hanging abdomen, spindly arms, that means thin arms, we can say. They're all symptoms of the Cushing syndrome, we can say. Okay, then finally, let's close this with sex hormones. The cells in the inner zona reticularis of the adrenal cortex produce sex hormones. What are the sex hormones? Androgens and estrogen. These hormones are male adrenal androgens. We can say androgens because they are released by testis also. So particularly we are saying adrenal androgens. But some of them are converted into female hormones, estrogen, by the skin, liver, and adipose tissue. These hormones may supplement the supply of sex hormones from the gonads. Actually, responsible for androgen and estrogens are going to be the testis and ovary. What we are saying here, these hormones may supplement the supply of sex hormone from the gonads and stimulate early development of the reproductive organ. Also, the adrenal androgens may play a role in controlling the female sex drive. Okay, what about the hypersecretion of the androgens? There is a possibility of adrenal virilism. That what you say, it is a sex reversal from female to male. Not happen in case of human being, but at least that hypersecretion of the adrenal, this area, what do you say that sex hormone, we can say that zona reticularis, that hypersecretion, less it is noticed actually. If it all happen, what happens? Adrenal virilism, which means sex reversal from female to male due to the excess of androgens. The facial hair and secondary sexual characters of the males develop into females. That in case of estrogens increase, what happens? In male, the gynecomastia condition can be seen over. That means sex reversal from male to female. Female like mammary glands develop in male. Female like mammary glands develop into male. Okay, so that's it. And Addison's disease. This is very important here. Addison's disease. Hyposecretion of the corticoids leads into Addison's disease. Hyposecretion of the corticoid leads into Addison's disease. How do you recognize Addison's disease? Bronzing of skin patches. We can say it is due to the hypersecretion of ACTH. So then the disorder develops due to atrophy or hypertrophy of the adrenal cortex. Amount of both sodium and glucose decreases in the blood. They are talking about a common point that that adrenal cortex, that means glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids, both will come. So that's why saying sodium of mineralocorticoid, glucose from glucocorticoid. Both metabolisms is going to be affected over. Amount of both sodium and glucose decreases in the blood. We say that is Addison's disease. To remember, that is very, very important. Okay, so that's the story of the adrenal gland. Adrenal gland. So the very important, I am saying again here, the adrenal gland has three layers. That cortex they are talking. Adrenal cortex is again having three layers. What are the three layers of the adrenal cortex? Zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. Okay. Next, the innermost layer. Who is called innermost layer? Innermost layer is said to be adrenal medulla. Okay, so adrenal medulla. The bigger area, this is the innermost layer, adrenal medulla. What do you say this as? Adrenal cortex. Okay, adrenal cortex. Zona glomerulosa is going to secrete the mineralocorticoid. Zona fasciculata is going to secrete the glucocorticoid. Zona reticularis is going to secrete the sex corticoid. This is very, very, very important. The mineralocorticoid. Who is the major mineralocorticoid? That to be remembered is aldosterone. Lot of hormones here, isn't it? Lot of hormones in case of this. Aldosterone. Then from major glucocorticoid is cortisol. Then major sex corticoids are androgens and estrogens. Androgens and estrogens. Okay. And from here, adrenal medulla, we have epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. Or we say it as adrenaline and noradrenaline. Okay, so this is the total story of adrenal gland. Adrenal gland, which include cortex and medulla. Okay, so